Hello, it's Phillip Taylor speaking from Richmond Green Chambers in London. Today I'm looking at a book I've reviewed before. I've met the authors, some of them, and this is a very important book. Now, I'm not going to tell you about a huge amount of information about what's in the book because it's a substantial work, but it's a book that I do think we should pay a lot of attention to. The book's title is Corruption and Misuse of Public Office. It's now in its third edition, and the lead writer on it is Colin, Nicholls, Queen's Counsel, assisted by Tim Daniel, Alan Bacarese, James Maton and John Hatchard. The title that I've given the review, it comes to us from Oxford University Press. I've given it the title, which I think one or two people may have some problems with, so I'll explain in a few minutes what that means. It says Sisyphus Revisited. Is it really as bad as we think, or worse? Now, I think that's a bit of a mischievous title. I shall come back to that in a minute. Let's look at the book first of all. Here it is. It's a heavy book, hardback. There we go. There's the spine, nothing on the back. Now, the back of the book, very much in the house style of OUP, Oxford University Press. There's the index. The index is by paragraph numbering. The book runs to just under 1,000 pages, 934. It's a very substantial index, and you can see how, I don't know how many pages it runs to, but it's a very substantial index in its own right. There are appendices, of course, at the back, but we just get to the front of the index because it doesn't actually explain to you that in fact the index is by paragraph numbering. It's useful to know that because it depends on what you may be looking for. The appendices at the back include, of course, the statutes themselves. If we go to the front of the book, there is the main first page, and then there's the blurb. Now, I just want to mention this. It's not in the review, but I would like to mention Colin's brother, twin brother, Clive, and there's a very nice memorial to him, which I would like to mention there. So thank you for that. We remember, obviously, Clive well. Now, the foreword to the third edition is set out there. That is written by Lord Phillips. Then we've got a foreword to the second edition, also by Lord Phillips. And the first edition, also by Lord Phillips. And then, of course, we've got the preface. And this is where Sisyphus comes in. And I'm going to tell you about him again in a minute. Preface to the second edition as well, and then preface to the first edition, then acknowledgements, then the table of contents, because this is a very detailed work. It's the authority. It is the authority on corruption and misuse of public office. Now, the table of contents are very substantial, running all the way through. It's split up into Part 1 criminal law, Part 2 asset recovery, Part 3 standard setting in the public and private sector, Part 4 international and regional anti-corruption initiatives, Part 5 corruption laws of other jurisdictions, Part 6 the role of civil society, good governance, etc. Then 3 appendices basically covering litigation. There are 24 chapters, sorry, not litigation, statutes. There are 24 chapters in total. The table of cases, again, is quite substantial. It starts with the UK cases and then it goes through to other case law jurisdictions and international courts. Then it's the table of legislation, treaties and conventions, which we've got. And then after that, when we get to it, you see how substantial it is. After that particular group, it's all linked together right at the end of the legislative table, right at the beginning. You've got the abbreviations, which I think are very, very helpful for this publication because there are a lot of abbreviations, as you can probably see. This runs on for a bit, and I think it's very important to have this because it's so easy to forget what an abbreviation stands for. Now, the biographical details of the authors are set out there for Colin and Tim, and the other one or two of them are newer editors to the work. Then you've got the structure of the book itself. Now you can see there, chapter 1, there's a mini index right at the beginning. Then you've got the paragraph numbering, which is on that side. So as you're looking at it, it's on my left, but you're looking at it on the right. Then you've got the footnotes at the bottom, and that runs all the way through. You can see how it runs. Then in the middle of the book, this is on misconduct in public office. You can see the structure there, and so forth, all the way through. Criminalisation of law enforcement there. And as I say, it's a very important book. A huge amount of effort has gone into this. I remember when the first edition was launched, which is some time ago now, I was most impressed that the authors had taken on board this subject. It's not the easiest subject in the world, and I will explain why. It's often said that repetition tends to emphasise a point rather well. A point in this instance where Sisyphus serves as a reminder to all of us because of what befell him. The authors of Corruption and Misuse of Public Office have likened the fight against corruption to the reviled Sisyphus, and for good reason. And let me explain. The tale about Sisyphus comes from Greek mythology. Sisyphus was condemned by Zeus to spend eternity pushing a large boulder up a mountain, never to succeed. The problem, like corruption, being that the boulder always came crashing down again just as it was reaching the pinnacle. Now, we've all been there probably in one way or another in going out with something to see everything coming back again, like the tide in the sea with your sandcastles. It's the same sort of problem, and the conclusion being that we will never defeat the scourge of corruption. Yes, is the answer to that, but we can have a darn good try at eradication, and this book tells you how, and that's why I think it's so valuable. Now, Colin, Nicholls and his team, that's Tim Daniel, Alan Bacarese, James Maton and John Hatchard, declare that despite the many positive global efforts to combat corruption, there was a general perception that these efforts were not succeeding and that things were getting worse, not better. And they conclude that such concerns inevitably remain. Of course, it's really about a matter of degree. And they cite some useful examples, which I found helpful from the previous edition, covering FIFA and the Olympics, just to name a couple. And to remind readers of the earlier edition, the Many-Headed Hydra was the original comparison. Interesting. And we're reminded, of course, that cutting off one head of the fabled monster produced two in its place, a most unsatisfactory arrangement. Now, having given you those two Greek mythological illusions or examples, you can see what the problem is really all about, because what the authors have done is they revised their original position, that's the authors, not the Hydra, writing that since the first edition of the book appeared, significant progress has actually been made, and is being made both nationally and internationally. And their evidence is reinforced by what they call the increasing political support on the part of many national leaders, as well as influential bodies such as the G20. And again, that really gives you a flavour for where the power will be if you're going to deal effectively with the really excessive elements of corruption. You're never going to stamp it out completely because it's part of the human condition. And I know that sounds defeatist, but that is actually a fact of life. However, you can see that a group like the G20 is very much it's one of the main areas where you might get some sort of general agreement. Now, all the information and the massive detail in the expanded third edition are to be welcomed because it covers law and practice in the field of corruption around the world, although the jurisdiction of England and Wales remains the principal focus. And as Lord Phillips says in the forward, this is the last forward, in fact the most recent one I would say, corruption is not necessarily on the increase. The growing size of the book is because of an increase in the measures that are being taken to root out and stamp out corruption. Now, I think His Lordship is probably right about that in the sense that we haven't got a big increase. There's a huge amount of corruption out there, but what we're trying to do now is to use some effective methods to sanction it. Now, Nicholls and his colleagues declare that combating corruption and the misuse of public office remains work in progress, which of course it does and is. And they hope their book will provide legal practitioners and other anti-corruption activists across the globe with guidance, assistance and encouragement. And in addition, it provides us with some of the tools to enable them, that's the practitioners, to fight corruption and misuse of public office more effectively. In other words, to help prevent Sisyphus' boulder from crashing down again. And I think they do that in spades, as we've come to expect. So a very big thank you to all of them. They're experts in their field. And, you know, you do make our lives a lot easier by setting out how to deal with this and explaining the problem to new audiences. Now, the law's stated as at the 31st of January 2017, and the book was published by OUP on the 28th of September 2017. Let's just have one last look at it. It's a heavy book, black cover. Then there's the spine, nothing on the back. Just opening it up in the middle. Let's find something interesting. Part 2, asset recovery. Always an interesting area. Asset recovery under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002, civil actions and remedies, international case studies. So you can see how it's structured. Little index, then the paragraph numbering at the sides, and then the footnoting. Again, you can see even here, people are being critical of the Proceeds of Crime Act, saying it hasn't worked sufficiently. All I would say to that is that we have at least got it. Obviously, once we do get these statutes in force, they have to be made to work, and if they don't work, we get rid of them and put something new which is more practical, which is the way in which we're always revising, reviewing what we're actually doing. I'd like to thank everybody involved in this book very much indeed. I think it's an important work. I was delighted to review it again, and as I say, it's a big thank you to all. OUP for taking on the work. You make our lives so much easier with this, and we're grateful to you. Do have a look at our reviews, which are on the web and in the journals. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.